and good day to you. You're tuned into the Feather of Light podcast about mental health, discussions around mental health and society, and at times diving into my personal philosophies or insights. Today, I'd like to bring you into an exploration of the topic of growth. Particularly, I'd like to explore the topic of what I consider philosophy of growth. So, just what is my personal philosophy of growth, and maybe just getting you curious about what your personal philosophy of growth might be. And I mean, what even is growth? How do we begin to define this abstract concept and start to create a practical understanding of how it shows up in our life? And I'm just gonna dive on in and start exploring. Well, to set the tone in a way, just want to explore this, let's just say the definition of what philosophy really even is. And I would say it's something about the way you think. So defining the way you think in terms of this process, I'd say, of transformation that we call growth. And how do I consider what contributes to my growth? How can I even really put this into words? I guess it's what I'm sitting with right now in this moment. But maybe I'm thinking too hard about it. I feel like the more I engage with the mind, the more I introduce a part that wants to make this some sort of epic exploration and make this some big valuable takeaway, which I'd like to say I might get there, but I'd like to really offer this part some reassurance that wherever we go is totally valid, and that I just want to be connected to my own experience of this podcast and my own experience, my own authentic expression. So I feel there's something here to getting out of my own way right now in this moment and just starting to really get curious about what's been working for me and what do I consider really helping people grow. Does it look like achieving goals? How can it be quantified in a way, you know? Does it look like the sort of working definition of when your mental health is quote unquote better, right? Is it in relation to how you show up in your life? How productive you are is kind of one of those markers. Or is it about your personal relationships? Is it about your ability to set your trajectory on something and then continuously move towards it? Is it feeling like you have a little bit more spaciousness from the time where something impacts you and you react, let's just say, blindly or primitively or reactively, I suppose? Yeah, is it control, quote unquote, over your automatic responses? Like, what are we speaking to here? What are the parameters for understanding growth? And I think each person will tell you a different story about what they consider growth and how they consider themselves to have grown over the years. I mean, we almost just want to start with the basic definition of I grew up. As a child, I grew in height. I developed my mind. I went from adolescence to adulthood. I grew older. I started to age, right? We think of aging. But can one stay in a similar mindset for their entire life, even if they're physically, biologically aging? And I would say yes. So then what is growth really? Is it about something within the mind? Is it about something within the way the body kind of relates to itself or relates to the mind? Is there something there? Yeah. Really just trying to put everything on the table right now. Trying to really explore what I've done in my life that actually feels like it's actually different than when I was a teenager. So maybe that's an easy sort of way to sort of start this, is what's changed for me, right? What's actually developed since I was a teenager. And some things have stayed the same, and I'd say many things have changed. So just trying to flesh this out some more. What's changed? I suppose my ability to keep a consistent routine has shifted. I'd say that my courage, like what I consider being courageous, has developed. I think my people-pleasing tendencies have lessened, or on some level been contextualized by what I actually consider to be worthwhile to invest in. I think my priorities have shifted. I think that's a big piece of growth, is your priorities change. And maybe that's just like the consequence or result of a different mindset and different beliefs, making different decisions in your life. So maybe I'm starting to get chip off a piece of this question of what is my growth philosophy or philosophy of growth. Something here about changing your mindset that leads to making different decisions that ultimately is the result of having different core beliefs. And actually, I was considering this morning. I'm trying to think of the example. I feel like there's some core beliefs that we hold that just kind of form for no reason, you know? Okay, yeah. This example was interesting. So I was scrubbing my boots, my hiking boots, and I scrub them just gently to get all the dirt off them, right? I want to keep them as mint as possible. They're nice hiking boots. So I remember my friend, when I was, my early 20s or something, he told me, you keep good care of these hiking boots because the dirt will deteriorate. It's like acidic. It will eat away at these boots. And I was like, oh God, I don't want the dirt to eat away at these boots. These boots are valuable to me. I love going on hikes. They help me tremendously. So it's just kind of like the belief was encoded. It's like a rule. I basically made a rule within myself. I was like, we don't allow dirt to accumulate on these boots. We scrub them just a little bit after every time we use them, keep them fresh. And I didn't question that rule at all. I was just kind of like, yep, it's how it is. It's like, that's a law, basically. You scrub the boots once they get dirty, and you keep them fresh. You keep them clean. You preserve something. You take care of something that means something to you. There's the belief. I take care of this thing, these boots, because they mean something to me. And, I don't want to say that's meaningless. It's actually pretty beautiful, but there's something there about how I could form that belief and not question it and not have to battle it and not have anything like intervene. It just became so clear to me that that's how it is. And I've just been continuously reinforcing that belief. Now, it's crazy how when we're kids and, while we're growing up, the types of beliefs that we form that are just not, in a sense, nonsensible, like you just don't question them at all. And some of those stick with us, I would say, pretty much our entire lives, right? Like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but let's just say, like, when you're a kid and someone tells you something like the boys' code or the girls' code or like the code. There's like a code, some sort of unwritten code. I remember it was Recess, the TV show, the cartoon. It's like the kids' unwritten code of honor, and it's like a trust thing, You don't rat on each other or something. It's kind of like an unwritten code, right? And it turned out the whole premise of the episode was at the end, the code didn't really mean anything. The code was kind of silly. It was a guiding principle, but it wasn't dogmatic. And if you reinforced it as dogmatic, it turns out it's not actually functional. It's not actually a well-written code. It's not actually a functional belief. So I think that's just a really good example of how when we're kids, I think we do take on and internalize these dysfunctional beliefs, let's just call them, or, we don't really test it. We don't really test how practical it is to follow this rule blindly. Like, I think there's some good examples when we're in, like, I don't know, kindergarten, elementary school, like stuff we learn in the classroom typically, but sometimes it's not the classroom, where it just feels like something that we feel is so important, and it just feels like it's so like clear that that is what is going to help us grow and develop and become, let's just say better, a better kid or more productive. And I don't know how much we actually question our beliefs is what I'm trying to say. I feel like we probably hold on to these beliefs that made sense at the time, that made perfect fucking sense. And this comes, I would say, very similar, very close to when you're unburdening your parts. This is one of the later stages of parts work, is you're starting to explore these beliefs that these kids, these child versions of you, are holding on to and still feel are relevant. And you have to consider that child developed these beliefs from the lens of a child, from the childlike mind and how they were operating and seeing the world. And they formed these rules or these laws, these internal systems developed around these internal laws or rules or agreements. And we don't question them for most of our lives. But then when you start to do some kind of self-work, when you start to question, what is my philosophy of growth? What actually constitutes me becoming a better version of myself in a way? I feel you start to kind of look at and get to kind of hold these beliefs up against a wall and be like, oh, okay, when did I form that belief? And for what reason did I form that belief? And does this actually align with my current perspective of growth, or my current perspective of, I don't know, what is valuable to me, or what contributes towards happiness for me? What is meaningful for me? Right? These are some pretty big questions, but I would say we consistently give answers to these questions on a daily basis. Maybe we just don't consciously realize what our answers are. It's almost like if you're asking yourself, what are my values? And you're embodying values that aren't those particular values. If, let's just say, if you were to get clear on them, it's kind of like you're saying, those aren't important to me. Yeah, on some level, I feel like these are things that are valuable, but I don't know if I actually want to or choose to embody those values. I feel like there's a decision we make when when resistance comes up and pushes us further away from aligning with our values, or we're reinforcing a belief every single time we act on, let's just say, the impulses or the decisions that belief drives. So there's a decision in that process, often automatically, where we're deciding that belief is more important than breaking that belief, or that a belief and how it makes me feel is more real, right? The past experience of that belief is more real than my current worldview and my current goals or my current relationships or my current behavior. It's kind of like you're choosing past you in a way. You are choosing past you over present you or over future you. So yeah, something there about how the belief systems that we create as children often go on to really, in a way, create this foundation for how we make decisions and how our behavior is essentially changing or not changing through those decisions. And then ultimately this becomes our philosophy of growth, is I grow or I don't grow based on, let's just say, these conditions, or based on what is preventing me from growth, based on what I fear. So I feel like this is an aspect of this conversation, is how can you talk about your philosophy of growth without considering the nature or just your relationship in general to fear? So maybe I've tangented a bit here. Maybe I have done what I'd say are necessary tangents, right? We're kind of broadening out. We're looking at all the relevant ideas around what is our philosophy of growth. But I guess just asking you this question, what is your philosophy of growth? How do you even measure success or happiness for you? Does it look like the picket fence with the big house and the partner and the kids? Is that your trajectory? And then how are you moving towards that? Or does it look like something entirely different? And growing for you might not actually equate to someone else's definition of growth or someone else's definition of success. And maybe just to bring this back to something I mentioned earlier is mindset. What is your mindset? How has that shifted? How does that incorporate or embody the beliefs that you hold now? And how much autonomy do you have over those beliefs? How much have you actually actively worked to, let's just say, design or on some level choose those beliefs? Because I believe very strongly, based on the way the mind works, we get to consciously choose. We get to consciously recognize and let go of, I would say, parts and transform them, not completely remove them, but transform these parts of us that are just stuck in the past, that are playing these loops and acting based on beliefs that are no longer serving us. And yeah, I suppose this is still a challenging question to answer. What is my philosophy of growth? I suppose I look at it in the context of creativity as well. I suppose it's challenging for me to consider myself growing as a person if that's not somehow also being, let's just say, represented or embodied through my artistic expression. So for me, my philosophy of growth involves developing as an artist, creating work I can be proud of, or creating deeper embodiments of my expression, right? Really showcasing my expression in different ways, being curious and creative as a person. I would say my philosophy of growth involves how I show up in my relationships, whether it be my family or let's just say something that's more within my control, because sometimes family is outside my control, but my personal relationship, my intimate partnership, how I show up in my friendships also can be an indicator of, let's just say, a type of growth. But I also just want to recognize that sometimes philosophy of growth needs to be something of a reference point that doesn't get pulled into all these external indicators that can relate to your growth, but really aren't a reflection of your internal growth process. I guess that's something I want to get clear on, is you can be growing as a person, and that can maybe, based on the way you're growing, maybe it's just unrelated, but that can also simultaneously look like having different relationships to people, or maybe the relationships you're in are just inherently challenging and you can't really compare, like you don't want to associate those two things directly. You could be in a happy, thriving relationship and be at a place of stagnancy, or on the contrast of that, you can be in a really challenging, tumultuous relationship but be growing. I would say it could be a lot harder to do the latter. Right? I would say it's important to have healthy, functioning relationships and healthy relationships, and that would promote growth within your life. But I would say it's possible to have I suppose a strong routine around how you grow, and it's encouraging you to further grow. But then at the same time, you're facing difficulties within a relationship as well. I think that's also possible. To get myself back on track, I'd like to really reflect on this idea for creating a structure for my coaching and counseling containers that came to mind just this morning as I was doing my run. And I thought about how, well, for me, it's about creativity. It's about creativity being, an artist, and how productive I am as an artist, right? But that's not always what's helping me, let's just say, continue this momentum of my growth. It feels to me like, as an ADHD person, so maybe I'm biased in this way, being not a neurodivergent person, I don't want it to be, I need to do art every day, or I need to do art every week, or I need to do breathwork practices every day or every week. For me, it feels like that consistency in a way doesn't function the same way it might for another person. And I consider the design of just looking at how I do stuff intuitively, and if I were to design a structure around that, it would look something like this. Art maybe twice a week, starting a person off with twice a week. If they can do more, awesome. So I would tell a client, let's do art twice a week. And it could be any creative expression, anything that works for you, but I want you to do it twice a week. And then alternating between that and the second week, I want you to do movement or something that gets you deeply attuned to your nervous system at least 2 to 3 times a week. And I want you to pair that with one breathwork exercise that regulates your nervous system within that second week. So it's kind of like you're alternating between the creative mind and the expression, embodiment of expression, and the somatic attunement. So there's both of those things, and you're not jam packing them all into 1 week. I mean, I figure over time you can, but just alternating between those two, and then giving them additional support each week through coaching, but also allowing them to work with one part during those, let's just say, month intervals of rotating between 2 to 3 creative, let's just call them sessions. I could even assign art therapy tools if they needed that, but at the same time, could just be painting, could just be free flow of expression of music, could be anything they do creatively. Could be movement actually, but I'd say for sake of the rotation, just maybe making it non-movement based. And then rotating from the creative to the somatic those are what the 2 weeks would look like. But in addition to that rotation, allowing them space or assigning them to give themselves space to check in with their parts, particularly a protector part that looks at fear, really getting them into a space of getting curious about fear and how a protector part might be showing up, and not judging or trying to control or change, but just checking in 5 to 10 minutes, real easy, real simple. What does fear look like for me? Or, hey, I just want to get curious about what part comes up for me when I get afraid or when I consider change, or, what am I afraid of kind of thing. And just getting curious around the topic of fear, 5 to 10 minutes. I'd say at least once per day, but it could be maybe 2 to 3 times a week if a person feels like once a day is too much. And then allowing that curiosity around fear to accumulate as they rotate between the creative and the somatic. And then ultimately there would be space for, I would say, meditation. If the person feels like those things alone aren't either enough, or they feel like they're doing those things so confidently and so competently that it's like, I could do that, no problem. So then it's like, okay, up in the ante. We're not going to introduce more of the other things. We're just going to layer in maybe one meditation session per week. And it's kind of like having that one meditation session per week, and then rotating between the 2 to 3 creative sessions, and then the somatic sessions, including breath work, 2 to 3 times a week. And then continuing to check in with the fearful part, which could be, again, once a day, it could be once a week. And then the continuous process that I would see happening in probably a couple months, that would be the growth. That would be how I would gauge as growth. So I guess it would be meeting these parameters of embodied expression, somatic attunement, and continuously developing a relationship to fear, or in this case, a part. Could be either of the two, but I would say fear is important regardless of whether you do parts work. So I guess that's my 3 kind of pillars of my philosophy of growth. And I feel like what I've done here is actually, I would say, I don't want to say it's the formula, but I would say it would be a way to which you could start to chart your philosophy of growth is, what do you do in a 2-week interval? Does this rotate between different activities that, by the way, aren't the only things you do, but are the things that are meaningful to you, that are valuable to you, that feel to you like that's progress. Like that is something that if you get it done, you feel fulfilled, you feel like it is enjoyable, but ultimately it's meaningful for you. So it has to, whatever it is you're tracking, I said creative expression, and I said somatic attunement, and I said checking with my parts, but I would say whatever it is that you're tracking to discover what is essentially charting your growth, I would say it has to involve something that you enjoy, something that's fulfilling to you, and something that ultimately provides meaning in your life. And then looking at your routine and looking at what these things are. What are these things that offer you fulfillment and are enjoyable to you and are meaningful to you? And how consistently do you need to do them each week to really meet that let's just say milestone of what you consider your personal philosophy of growth? And then how can you map that out in addition to what I consider is the checking in with the fear? I think the first two are kind of like, you could replace those with whatever you want. For me, it's the creative expression and the somatic attunement. But the third one I feel isn't replaceable. I feel like checking in with your fear is ultimately the way that you're going to propel yourself forward, because your fear is going to be constant in a sense. It's regardless of what your first two things are. I feel like the checking in with your relationship to fear, or checking in with the part that governs how you work with your fear, that's going to be I would say the most important of those three things. So like getting back to that, what are your first two? Maybe these two resonate. Maybe you do want to see how frequently you're expressing yourself or embodying creativity, whatever that looks like. Or maybe, you are rotating between being creative and somatic attunement already, and just like mapping that and charting that and seeing, okay, what is the amount of times per week? What is the amount of times per every 2 weeks? Do you even need to rotate, or do you work better just having things the same each week? Just mapping it out. And then also continuing to reassess, what am I afraid of? What does this part feel would happen if I were, if it weren't to show up? If like, what's it afraid of? Ultimately, just asking yourself the question, what are you afraid of? What am I afraid would happen if I push myself a little bit further and I go outside my threshold and I meet my expectation of what I feel I can do? What happens when you reach that milestone? What happens when you reach that end goal? What's the next thing that's going to motivate you? What's really your end goal? I think is a really good question too, right? What's your picket fence? What's your vision of success? What are you even moving towards in 3 to 5 years? That has, I won't say nothing, but in some sense, it's not something you can tangibly quantify in this current moment or week by week. It's like you're putting drops in the jar, and you can't sit there and say that, like, what the jar looks like. I'm trying to think of like when you're painting a painting and you start just kind of putting those first couple little points in, right? You're just kind of playing around with colors and you're just sort of filling in some of the landscape, or you're just starting to kind of get an idea for what's even happening. You can't see the picture. You can't see the full painting as it is. You don't know the contrast of the foreground to the background, or the contrast of colors, or kind of like the shapes or the symbols or whatever. You don't know any of that. You're just starting to kind of put in dots. So I guess just asking you that question is, well, how are you filling in your painting continuously, even if you're not really sure what that end goal is? Do you have a kind of mental image? Do you necessarily need that? Some people don't, but do you have something of a mental image? Even if it's just kind of like a working image that shifts and changes, but just your initial mental image of what your painting is going to look like, what your vision is going to look like, what your end goal is going to look like. And then, just considering what is your philosophy of growth, like what works for you, really, What are the things that you're doing during your week that are actually contributing towards growth? And how can you track that? And if you were to design a system for yourself, that's kind of what I was speaking to. If you design a system for yourself, week by week or month by month, what would that involve? How many times per week or per couple weeks or per month would you be required to meet that thing? And yeah, like, how are you assessing, engaging? Well, I would say your relationship to fear. Or how would you measure your success, right? How are you measuring whether you're actually moving forward? For me, I would say it's about fear and my relationship to fear. And if I feel like I'm pulling away from things that scare me, or I'm not having conversations that I at one point considered terrifying or uncomfortable, I'm not leaning into conflict as much, I would say that I'm doing something quote unquote wrong, or there's something that I'm doing that's allowing me to get back into my comfort zone, and I'm enabling a part of me that doesn't want to lean into that fear. And I would say, recognizing that if there's a part of you that doesn't want to lean into that fear, there's a part of you that also does want to lean into that fear. And this is where you can get curious. This is where you can really start to explore and tap into the parts that also want to go deeper, but maybe just don't know how. Or maybe they're still living in an old belief. Or maybe the other part that doesn't want to go deeper is just so loud and so controlling. So, you can work with that part that's controlling and loud and is preventing you from having the conversation around fear with yourself or with another person. Either is fine. And seeing if it's willing to give you some space. So at the end of the day, my growth mindset feels like it comes from having conversations with protector parts that don't want to talk with you. And you have to initiate the conversation. You have to engage with them in some shape or form. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy or they're all that receptive at first, but just trying, just putting in the effort and trying to initiate some form of contact with these protector parts. I would say this is how you're able to learn more about your own relationship to fear. You learn more about what growth is for you. You learn more about what your personal philosophy of growth even is through trial and error, through really just continuing to push that rock up the hill. Sisyphus, right? The myth of Sisyphus. You just continue pushing that boulder. You continue pushing that boulder and you do it with a smile. And you don't sit here and pontificate on why you're pushing the boulder or what's at the top, or, you don't get stuck and stop pushing. You just keep on pushing it with a smile, and you find a way to win that battle each day. You find a way to get your mind on your side and to start to form beliefs that are functional and making life easier for you. So at the end of the day, I guess that's kind of what we want. So we want beliefs that make our life easier, not beliefs that make our life harder. We don't want to continue making these beliefs that make our life hell. I'd say it's much simpler and more enjoyable and more fulfilling, and it leads to more meaning if we're able to create beliefs in our life about the people in our lives, or about who we are or how we fit into this world, that just help us and serve us and support us so that we can go on and apply those same beliefs to support the people in our lives that we want to support the people that we care about, be of service to them, love them, show up for them, be present with them, be present with our kids, be present with our families. Like, that's just really it, showing up for yourself, growing for yourself, and growing for your kids and your families and your next 7 generations. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you offering your presence and trusting me in a way, trusting where I was going with this. There's a lot to explore when it comes to growth. And I feel like it just takes starting something. It takes day one. It takes just going out there and doing that run that one morning where you're like, I don't know if I want to do it. And you just try it out. Get curious, experiment. So for those of you who are also looking for someone to support you in this process, I'm looking for at least one coaching client, just one probably, but also a couple counseling clients, people who are really ready to jump in, maybe are interested in parts work, maybe are interested in working with creative tools, maybe you're a writer, maybe you're an artist, maybe you're not, but I just really want to offer a space where I can create safety and expression and authentic witnessing, and we can explore that together. And so I have availability for some counseling clients. The parts work sessions are also going to be continuing on October the 6th, so on the Saturday. It's going to be a group where we can just kind of riff and learn. It's really just about learning about parts work and getting curious around our parts, and education as well as witnessing and accountability are the sort of main tenets of this space. We'll also be creating spaces in the future for integration of psychedelics, and I will also be creating containers for men to be witnessed or witness other men. So stay tuned, and you have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, and I'll see you next time.